Guys, the channel is called The Layman, and I am here to give Darante Lamar another opportunity. I covered one of his books. I'm sorry, not his books. What am I talking about? His talks on my other channel, Mr. Biscuit Speaks, and this is my second attempt at an interaction with Darante Lamar. I think that he just leaves really, really big things unexamined and then moves forward. It's like if you just give him this one mistake, he can build things out of that mistaken assumption. He does that a lot and kind of leaves me yelling at the screen like you have to go back and correct this mistake to figure out why your conclusion doesn't hold. But nevertheless, let's take a look at what Durante has to say.
There's no such thing as a good Christian. And no, this isn't me being provocative. This is me being doctrinally sound. I'm not attacking anyone's character. I'm quoting the doctrine. Because according to the red letters in your own Bible, Jesus himself said, "Why do you call me good? No one is good but God alone."
See, now I'm imagining that his entire spiel, and he goes on for apparently 11 minutes. I'm going to imagine, just because I've interacted with his videos a couple of times, I'm just imagining that he is going to base an entire speech off of that one faulty assumption. I mean, I think if there was an alien from outer space that came to the planet without any biases, and you said, if a man says, if a man asks the question, why do you call me good? Because there is none good but God alone, right? Does it follow logically that the only conclusion is this man has rejected the title good? Like anyone, any rational logician is going to say, no, that's not what that means. It doesn't follow that because Jesus says, why are you calling me that I reject what you're calling me. But Durante is going to base the entire video, I'm assuming, on that first mistake. And this is kind of this. It's like he doesn't consider this one bit, and then he builds this really smart, rational outworkings of his mistaken assumption in the beginning.
That's not atheism. That's the Gospel of Mark. So let's get this straight. If Jesus didn't even call himself good, what does that say about the millions of people walking around calling themselves good Christians?
See, now, check this out. Here's another mistake. Here's mistake number two. What if Jesus did reject the title good, which I don't believe. I think that that's Durante's first mistake. But let's assume he's accurate and that Jesus said, no, I'm not good, right? It doesn't then follow that you can't be a good Christian, right? So if Jesus says, I'm not good, there's none good but God, then believing in that, believing the same thing as Jesus, that there is none good but God, would actually make you a good understander of that message. You wouldn't proclaim yourself as good, but from an objective perspective, people would look at you and say, yeah, you are rightly following what Jesus said. And so now you're just getting into a rabbit hole within a rabbit hole about what categorizes something as good. Take, for instance, let's say that there was a philosopher that says, there is no good thing, all things are bad. And then you walked behind that philosopher and you said, hey, you know what? I'm a follower of this philosopher who believes that all things are bad. And I also believe all things are bad in accordance with this philosopher's teachings. Everyone who understands that philosopher and your following of that philosopher would call you a good follower, right? Even though you don't believe that there's anything good, from an objective perspective, people would say you are doing this well. You are a good disciple of this principle. So not only is his first assumption false, he goes on and follows it up with something that doesn't even follow from his first mistake.
According to the Bible, they don't exist. Not because people can't do good things, but because the theology requires you to believe you're broken, sinful, and incapable of true goodness on your own. That's not just bad psychology, that's baked in self-contempt disguised as humility.
And I mean, I think it's mistake after mistake after mistake. I mean, the third mistake that he makes now is the false assumption that this whole there is no goodness apart from God is a fundamentally Christian idea. I mean, this concept goes back to the Greeks. It's certainly present in the German philosophers like Friedrich Nietzsche, who said, insofar as we believe in moral law, we pass sentence on existence. It's not merely a Christian idea that without God there is not a moral category. A lot of people would say that follows rationally, right? How can you say what ought to be done in a universe where there is only is, right? This is a critique of David Hume, for instance, who's by no means a Christian. And so that's the fourth mistake in under 60 seconds.
And it's one of the most overlooked obstacles in deconstruction. Because when your goodness has always depended on your brokenness, letting go of the belief feels like letting go of your only shot at redemption. But what if you never needed to be saved from being human in the first place? So let's start where most Christians claim to build their lives. The words of Jesus. Not Paul, not Augustine, not your pastor, Jesus. Because if we're being honest about what the red letters actually say, then this entire conversation changes. We must understand that Jesus said this first. In the book of Mark, he says, "Why do you call me good?" Jesus answered, "No one is good except God alone." That's chapter 10, verse 18, reading from the New International Standard Version. Now let that sit for a moment. Jesus, the central figure of Christianity, the supposed moral exemplar, the one Christians are supposed to imitate, refused to accept the label good.
You know what? What's interesting is that this is like one of the first questions that young Christians ask pastors and youth ministers. This is asked in like Sunday school. And so it's strange to me that Darante isn't familiar with the common answer given to the question of, why does Jesus say to the man, "Why do you call me good? For there is no good but God alone," right? It's almost like he's lost on the idea that this is like a common thing which is expressed. I hope that he gets to the idea. I hope he gets to the point where he says, okay, I know what Christians you will typically say in response to this, so that we can get some real content here.
And he wasn't being modest. He was making a theological statement. Goodness belongs to God alone. That's not just humility, that's exclusivity.
Right, but Christians think Jesus is God. It's like, how does he not know that? Does he not know that Christians believe Jesus is God?
It draws a hard line between God and everyone else, even himself in human form. So let's follow the logic here. If Jesus doesn't get to be called good, then nobody else gets to either. That includes you.
If Jesus doesn't get to be called good, then you don't get to either.
That includes every Christian who thinks their belief makes them a better person. But how are you better if you can't even be good? And suddenly, the entire Christian identity gets exposed for what it really is. Not a celebration of goodness, but a declaration of insufficiency. This isn't a religion that tells you you can be good. It tells you you are not good and never will be unless you admit that and surrender to the one who is. That's the core deal. You're broken by default. You're dependent by design. Your best traits are worthless unless they're baptized in divine approval.
Now, let's get those three right in line, right? Let's really see how we feel about those three.
You're broken by default.
You're broken by default. By broken, that means you are a fallen version of something that you used to be. Maybe that's what he means by you're broken by default. Or maybe your nature is sinful. And by sin, I mean the tendency of human beings to identify with transient things. I believe that that's true so far.
You're dependent by design.
You're dependent by design. Human beings are in a state of becoming. We are dependent by design. We're dependent, in our sanity. We're dependent on other human beings, on communities. We depend on food and water, or else we'll die. So these aren't critiques. The thing is, I want you to understand, Darante, he has this way of expressing things which aren't really truly critiques. They're just manifestations of the human condition. And yet he poses them as if they're criticisms of religion as opposed to just obvious things about how we exist.
The core deal. You're broken by default.
True.
You're dependent by design.
True.
Your best traits are worthless unless they're baptized in divine approval.
True. So your best traits. So let's say, because it's without divine approval, your best traits are worthless, right? This once again is not rooted in theology. This is who was it? Camus, the myth of Sisyphus. How everything just kind of becomes vanity if it's for no reason. If your intellect and your moral goodness and everything that you're trying to do for the world, if that vanishes when placed against the background of eternity, or how long the earth won't be here after it's gone, then it really doesn't matter. If what's fundamental is chaos, then these things truly don't matter. And I would love to hear him make the argument that they do, right? But this is kind of one of the reasons that religion fills so many people's lives with meaning, is because you get that narrative order. You are a character in a wider narrative so that there's meaning. Your short life actually matters in the long run. So if he wants to posit some meaning beyond that, I'd like to hear him try. Not to say that it's impossible, but
According to Jesus, there is no such thing as a good Christian, only a forgiven one. So if Jesus said,
according to Jesus, there's no such thing as a good Christian. He just kind of pulled that out of nowhere based on a misinterpretation of Mark that he's still running with. So, I mean, if you were to ask your favorite large language model and say, hey, what was Jesus's idea of a good Christian? It's going to say, it's going to say many people do not enter, the kingdom of heaven, but those who do the will of the Father, those are the good Christians. Those who do for the widow, the people who visit the prisoner in times of need and give to the poor. That's what Jesus was interested in, and that's what Jesus associated with righteousness and godliness. Guys, I tried. I did try. You can't say that I didn't try. I'm not going to do the whole video, but that's Darante Lamar. Either I'm grossly misunderstanding what he's getting at or what he's trying to get at, or he's doing a really bad job convincing me that there's any there.